All right, let's dive into something really fascinating today. It's a creative project called Verdant and Gold, and what it does is it takes the classic legend of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and just flips it completely on its head. It's all about holding a mirror up to the soul of Arthur's court.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get the big picture, the main concept. Then, we'll look at its really unique two-part structure. After that, we'll dive into each of those parts, the comic book and the animation, before we get to the project's powerful ultimate vision. And boom, right out of the gate, you get the project's core mission. This isn't just about retelling an old story, it's an investigation. The whole point is to expose the, quote, cracks and fissures of human failing. So you know right away this is going to be a serious deep dive.
Okay, Section 1. Let's get into what it actually means to deconstruct a legendary story like this one.
Now, this is a really key point. The creators are very clear. Verdant and Gold is not another adaptation. It's a thematic deconstruction. It's all about pulling apart that core conflict between our fragile, civilized ideals and the raw, primal truth of nature. So everything in this project really orbits around these three big ideas. You've got the questioning of chivalry itself. Then it asks, do our fancy social rules actually stand a chance against pure primal fear? And finally, it looks at how forces that have been pushed aside, like nature and the feminine, start to reclaim their power. We're talking big philosophical questions here.
So, how do they actually explore all this? Well, that brings us to the project's most unique feature, its dual media format, what they call the symbiotic narrative engine.
This is so cool. Instead of just, making a book and then a movie of that book, the comic and the animation are designed to be symbiotic. They're two halves of one complete story. You really need both to get the full picture, which creates this incredibly rich, layered experience for the audience.
And this table just breaks down the strategy so perfectly. On one side, you have the comic book. That's told from Morgan Le Fay's perspective, and it's all about the deep lore, the philosophy, basically the why behind this whole grand scheme. Then you have the animation, which is all about Sir Gawain's personal journey, the atmosphere, the how it all feels.
And this slide just nails that idea home. The comic, that's your intellectual deep dive. It's where you uncover all the complex motivations. The animation, that's your emotional, gut-level experience. It's like one part explains how the machine works, and the other shows you what it feels like to be a gear turning inside it.
All right, let's take a look at that first piece of the machine, the comic book series. This is really the philosophical heart of the whole project.
So the tone they're going for here is something like a classic Alan Moore comic, dense, poetic, really philosophical. It paints Camelot not as some shining paradise, but as a gilded cage, a place of, quote, self-satisfied virtue. It's a really cynical, critical look at the legend.
And who's the architect of all this? A completely reimagined Morgan Le Fay. Forget the simple evil witch. Here, she's the protagonist. She's a brilliant philosopher, an anarchist even. And her whole goal is to kickstart a psychological apocalypse, to wake these knights up from their moral coma.
And get this, here's where it gets really wild. There's a meta twist. Morgan knows she's a character in a story. She's fully aware she exists inside a long-running comic book that has a lot of retcons, and she's had enough. She's determined to break that fourth wall and finally take control of her own story. How cool is that?
So in her story, Morgan is playing with two key symbols. First up is the pentacle on Gawain's shield. In this version, it's not a symbol of virtue, it's a magical trap, an endless knot of impossible perfection that's designed to suffocate the human soul because, let's be real, nobody can actually live up to it.
And then you have the total opposite of that, the green girdle. Unlike the pentacle, which has one rigid meaning, the girdle is complex. Its meaning keeps shifting. It represents the messy, chaotic, compromised truth of just trying to stay alive. Right there, you have the story's central conflict in two symbols.
Okay, so we've got the dense philosophical comic. Now let's pivot to the other half of this experience, the haunting, gothic stop-motion animation.
So for the animation, you gotta picture something like Tim Burton at his best. It's described as a masterwork of gothic whimsy. The whole visual style is high contrast, twisted shapes, almost like German expressionism. And the focus is entirely on Sir Gawain's personal psychological torment.
And the whole thing kicks off with a prologue movie that lays it all out.
First, we meet this fun-loving lord, Bertilac, who's just bored out of his mind. Then, Morgan Le Fay shows up and, in a spooky musical montage, makes him an offer he can't refuse. And finally, bam! The Green Knight smashes into Camelot, and the game is on.
Now here's a really clever bit of storytelling. How does Morgan operate inside the castle? She's there the whole time, but she's in disguise as this repulsive old hag. And it's brilliant because it basically makes her invisible. She gets to be a silent judge, watching Gawain's every move, and no one has a clue that she's the one pulling all the strings. Okay, let's bring it all home. In our final section, let's see how these two different stories, the comic and the animation, come together to deliver the project's real, powerful message.
So, the story's climax totally reframes Gawain's big moment. You know, when he accepts the green girdle to save his life? Well, here, that's not his failure. It's not a fall from grace. It's his liberation. He's finally breaking free from the simulation of perfect chivalry and waking up to what it really means to be human, messy, complicated, and beautiful.
And this is where the real gut punch of this story comes in. When Gawain gets back to Camelot, the court thinks his girdle is cool, so they all start wearing one. It becomes this superficial fashion statement, a shareable badge of honor. But Gawain is left with the scar on his neck. That's something he can't share. It's the permanent mark of his fear, his humanity. He's been changed forever, and they just don't get it.
So the whole project leaves us with this final, really provocative question. Once you've seen the messy truth behind the shining armor, once you've seen those cracks and fissures of human failing, what does that do to our idea of a hero? Is a perfect hero even a hero at all? It's a question that really sticks with you.